Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. We hope you have had a great morning already, and we thank you for joining us. My name is John Shoemaker from the Department of Educational Technology, and I'm joined by
Kaylin Markman. I am from the Department of Teaching and Learning.
So today we're here to talk to you about hitting the reset button. We know that school starts tomorrow, so we are going to share just a few things before we get started, just a little housekeeping. First, we're on a little bit of a delay, so we have some great people in the chat box who have a little tiny wrench next to their name. Those are our moderators. They're here to help you answer any questions you may have. We're going to try to make this as an engaging activity as possible, so please feel free to answer the questions that we are giving you guys throughout in the chat box to kind of stir the conversation a little bit. It's a little bit different than just a normal presentation. So please feel free to share as many ideas as you can to help your colleagues prepare for tomorrow. Don't forget also, we are merely sharing ideas with you. All of your expectations on what you're supposed to be doing starting tomorrow do come from your administrators. So please make sure you reach out to them if you need any clarification. This is just a conversation to guide you about some of the things you may not have thought about on how to go and teach online. So please keep all those things in mind. Questions in the chat box. We're on a little bit of a delay. This is being recorded and is actually live on YouTube right now. You can join our YouTube channel down below by clicking on our name. Feel free to also click subscribe and hit the bell. We're actually here 4 times for you today. We're going to be doing this session twice because we heard that there are some people who had staff meetings this morning and really wanted to join it, so we're doing this again in the afternoon. We're also going to cover the 2 other most important topics you need for tomorrow, which is Google Meet and Google Classroom. So thanks again for joining us, and we're just going to get started. So obviously right now we are at a huge change and a huge shift in the way our normal operations work. This actually being the official first day back, we know that we really need to think about what we're going to do to change the way that we're teaching. It's obviously a new frontier, and we're just trying to share some ideas that you may not have thought about as we go. So with that, go ahead, Kaylin, and take over.
So as John mentioned, as this whole process has unfolded, we were talking a lot of, everybody was talking a lot about platforms, content. And in many of my conversations with colleagues, I thought to myself, are we going to stop for a second, or as we've mentioned, hit the reset button and figure out what it is that we need to do to kind of start over? It's an exciting venture that we're about to get into, but I think we need to be really cognizant of some of the things that we need to do to make this very successful. So as we started to think about hitting a reset button and what does that really mean? Well, the first piece in a classroom that's very important to us, obviously, is routines, right? So we know that as a classroom teacher, consistency is key. And we have to set routines from the beginning of the year. Now we find ourselves in March. So when we talk about hitting the reset button, we talk about resetting those things that we established in the very beginning of the year. But now it looks a little bit different. So what kind of routines are we talking about? We're talking about realistic routines. We're talking about flexible routines as well, because this is a new venture. So some of the routines that you might want to consider as you're preparing yourself is, when are going to be the hours of your live class? And if you're going to host live classes, that should be pretty consistent. When are your office hours? And again, office hours are not the same thing as a live class. Think about when you were in college and a professor having office hours. Some people might come to visit, other people might not. So within that hour or 2 hours that a professor had office hours, one day they might see 10 people and another day they might not see anybody. So it's having that space and time for kids to be able to connect with you. I think that that's really important. What routines are you considering with posting your work? At what time will that happen every day? And that kind of consistency, again, I go back to, is super important as everyone is trying to navigate this space that is very unfamiliar. So that is people, parents or families working from home, multiple siblings working at home. And so there needs to be some sort of routine that we can get into. I'm sure you're noticing even in your personal life right now, your routines have been a little off. So when maybe you're going to bed or having breakfast, or when laundry is being done, or grocery shopping, our whole lives have essentially changed. So setting these routines for handing in work, this is very important. I know that we are using Google Classroom heavily, and that's wonderful because it's a fantastic tool. But some of you might be using your platforms that your publishers have. So I know, for example, in science, we use STEM Scopes, and they have a very robust online platform. So students might be turning in their work there. How are you handling that, in addition to possibly using Classroom? Taking attendance. John, why don't you speak to the piece on ParentLink?
Sure thing, Kaylin. So one of the ideas that we really would love to share, ParentLink was actually rolled out to all teachers at the beginning of this year, I believe, but there wasn't that much advertisement about it. So if you did not know, if you're a classroom teacher who has assigned students, you can actually go into your portal and search for ParentLink, and you can actually send out, I believe it's just chat or email. I don't think teachers can do phone calls, but still, these are great ways to reach out to your families, for parents who have their numbers or email addresses inside of the SIS when the registration happened. So for example, you could send, hey, don't forget to join us in Google Classroom tomorrow, because that's happening tomorrow. The district has been sending out large-scale, parent links, but don't forget that you have that ability as well, as long as your administration says that's okay.
And if anybody has any suggestions for other routines that you might want to include, I do notice one from John Long, which is fantastic. A word of the day. I like the idea of persevere. That might be the first word, and use it in a sentence during your day. So, John, I will persevere through this week.
I agree. I think that's a great idea, doing a word of a day and having students. That could just be a material post inside of Classroom where you put the word of the day, and your students then just have to reply with their sentence each day, and maybe relate it to what they're going through, and turn it into almost like an SEL activity as well. With regards to taking attendance as well, we've shared on every live stream on our Google Classroom page, located at edtechtraining.palmbeachschools.org. We do have some sample attendance forms that you can use. There's an elementary version and a secondary version. You can grab those, make a copy, add or subtract any questions that you want. But it has a couple of questions in there that are asking your students basically how well they slept last night. Did they have a great breakfast? How they're feeling. So that gives you really a quick overview of your students. And if you see all your students are really sad today, then you know the quality of work may not be as what you're normally expecting. And so you may just need to reach out personally and have a Google chat with them or something like that, just to make sure that you can give them some of that encouragement to move forward. Are there any other comments I see in the chat? We've got like problem of the day. John Long is throwing them out there for you guys. Problem of the day, current event factoid. Lee, great idea. Quote of the day with the citation, and having students react to that. That's a great idea.
I'd even like that, John, as a suggestion in the check-in or attendance piece. So you could essentially, teachers, add that. So I know a lot of the teachers that I work with, they do a consistent bell ringer, right? Many teachers do that. So a lot of the teachers are using their bell ringer as their attendance. And so if that, for example, in science for classes that I support, looks like multiple choice, standardized test questions that align to the standard, and that's their check-in or their bell ringer. Mm-hmm. We've added those SEL pieces that John was mentioning to those as a check-in, but it wouldn't be a bad idea to almost incorporate several of these ideas that people are bringing up, whether it's a word of the day or a current event or a quote, and giving kids a choice, that voice and choice of picking one of them that they want to share.
Agreed.
Class might be a great idea.
For just because you're the science girl too, must be one of your science people. Kind of a cute idea of the organism of the day. Figure out what that one is. I think that's cute too. But even sharing, I agree, sharing students that they do need to unplug sometimes. Doing things like puzzles, coloring, drawing, even turning away. I'm addicted to my Nintendo Switch now because a new game came out. So, but even unplugging from those types of things, put the phone away, put the computer away, and just do some hands-on kind of things. And then also John is also sharing there are great STEAM challenges out there too. So just doing a lot of those project-based learning things as well.
Absolutely. So we know that routines are very important, and I thank you to every participant that shared something, and those that later watch this will benefit greatly from that. Moving from routines to expectations. So we know that expectations as a teacher are extremely important. But routines combined with expectations, whether physical or digital, right? We know that that's a foundation to a successful classroom. Now, this transition that we've made has been really quick. And so what's important about thinking about our routines and our expectations is that we have to go into this with a growth mindset. This has now become our new norm. Realistically, it is, right? How do we spend Saturday night? Watching live music from a living room of a musical genius, right? That's not how we spent Saturday night before, but that's our new norm. So we can't think that this is going to be business as usual right out of the gate. I think it's really important that as we go into this and we think about our expectations, that we are realistic about them and that we're flexible. So a lot of the things that we're going to have to think about with regard to expectations are things around digital citizenship and how to behave on Google Meet and in classroom. So I know that John will probably throw up the link, but Rebecca from the Ed Tech team has been working really hard on creating a tech-safe website to make suggestions as to how we do that. And I don't know if you want to speak to that really quickly, John.
For sure. Rebecca has created techsafe.palmbeachschools.org. Each school actually goes through TechSafe each year, but on that website there are some great lessons by grade level that you can take and share with your students. So you can take them right from that website and paste them in as an assignment into your Google Classroom. There are videos, there are activities. There's a lot of great stuff on techsafe.palmbeachschools.org. So please feel free to check that website out in addition to our own website for ideas on how to have that digital citizenship piece that you really need to talk about up front. Like, this is the first discussion you need to have with your students tomorrow is what do you expect from them? Just like day one of the first day of school in August, this is why we're saying we're hitting the reset button, because tomorrow is day one again.
Day one. So when you in your own classroom think about that, in the past, you've given them an expectation for if you want to ask a question, right? If you want to contribute to a discussion, if you want to sharpen your pencil, if you want to go to the bathroom. So all of these things are expectations that you've had in your classroom. Well, now you're still going to have expectations, but they'll slightly shift. So how do you talk in a chat window? What's the expectation of that? And I know that often it's challenging for kids. While they're amazing on a device and they can certainly text way faster than I can, when it comes to typing with two hands on a keyboard, often a question doesn't come out as quickly as you might like to spur a discussion. So we started to talk about, well, how could kids maybe signal you, right? for John mentioned the minions that are in the chat window right now that are amazing and supporting this discussion. Well, if they weren't there handling a lot of that stuff, how would you handle that? So that's something to think about. If people had questions, could they put a question mark? Could they just simply do that so that if, let's say, Tasha had put a question mark in that box, I would be able to tell Tasha if we were in a live class, Tasha, could you please unmute yourself and ask your question, right? Or is it a point that they want to add? So maybe that's with an exclamation point, or maybe an asterisk stands for something else. So these are just some suggestions. How to communicate, whether you agree with someone's idea or disagree, or you want to support someone further. We know that in a chat stream, it can get very difficult to follow the flow if you're not careful. So who are you responding to? So that might be something to think about when you're talking to the kids about using the person's name if they're going to chat and say something in a discussion. Not a bad idea either to have discussion stems. We have sentence stems often that we give to kids, whether we want them to do a one-sentence summary. I know in my classrooms with teachers, I've given them discussion stems when we're having live discussions in class. So how to engage in conversation and be respectful but disagree, or how to support someone's ideas. So providing kids with some maybe discussion stems in your Google Classroom would be super helpful. What's the expectation for when work is due? What does that look like? If they're struggling with that, how do they communicate that to you? What are the expectations if you're setting up collaborative tasks with kids? Maybe they're working on a presentation and slides together. Maybe they're working on a Google Doc together. What is that expectation? One of the things that has come up in many of my conversations with teachers is a new syllabus. And not necessarily content. We know that that hasn't changed, but your expectations have, your routines have, your rules. And remember, and I just want to point this out because I had tons of conversations in the last week. Make sure that you differentiate between a rule and a guideline. And I often said this in my regular classroom as opposed to just now. A rule is something that when it's broken, there's some sort of consequence to that, and you can do something about that. A guideline to success is very different than a rule, right? I used to say to my students, having a pencil in class, right? That's a guideline for success. It's not a rule, right? What am I gonna do if you don't have a pencil? I'm gonna provide you with one. So to me, you wanna think about, it's about having supplies or being prepared. And so really when you're thinking about the structure of your new classroom, this new online world, what do those guidelines for success look like? And think about also with that, what are your expectations also of yourself, right? We really need to be good to ourselves and good to our kids. So I know right now there's that feeling, there's a burden right now. There's this feeling of overwhelming. There's an overwhelming feeling of, I don't know how to do this. And I want you to not, you can't hold yourself to the same expectation that you held yourself to 3 weeks ago, because this is a new venture, right? You'll get there. I know all of you will. Once you get your footing, you're gonna take off and run with this. But be realistic with your expectations. So whatever your non-negotiable is, and everybody has one every day, make that within reach. So if that is that bell ringer or that check-in, and that's the non-negotiable for your classroom, just be realistic about that. John, do you want to add anything to that?
I'm just going to share some things from the chat. John was sharing, going back to the digital citizenship, especially for our younger ones, great time to talk about Little Red Riding Hood again and not speaking to strangers online. That goes back to that whole differentiation. Would I be working with this with high school? Probably not, but we really need to do that age-appropriate training for our students. All of our students from kindergarten through 12 are on these digital platforms right now. So we really need to teach them how they need to behave themselves. There were some other ones, where did it go? Talking about choosing additional resources, finding additional resources, expectations for yourselves. And then there are other questions like this.
That's a good point, Joan. Definitely. I understand that. You have to figure out what's going to work for you. So that's a great point to bring up to the students, right? That this process, this is going to evolve, right? We're going to make adjustments. We're going to reflect every day and make adjustments as needed.
Yep. Some of the other ideas Wendy was sharing: an end of the day reflection, an exit ticket. What did you learn, find interesting? Great idea.
I like that. And with that exit ticket, and I know that Ed Tech is going to be doing a webinar next week on it on Flipgrid, right? Mm-hmm. So what did you learn or find interesting? They could have that option if they wanted to respond in video form through Flipgrid, if they didn't want to respond in a written piece. So giving kids a little voice and choice at this time might also engage them a bit more as well.
Another expectation is how much time students are expected to spend online, how much time your work is going to actually take to complete, compared to if you're in secondary, there are 5 or 6 other teachers.
And that is really important to remember. We mentioned this the last time we did this live stream, and it's important to know that your kids, I want you to think about this when they sign in tomorrow for the very first time. If you're the secondary teacher, let's say you're the high school teacher or the middle school teacher, right? This is the 9th grader or 6th grader on campus the very first day. They don't know where the cafeteria is. They don't know where Building 8000 is. They can't find this room. How do I get here? Where am I getting the bus? All of those things. And they now have, again, 6 different teachers with 6 different sets of expectations that have now changed. So what Ms. Markman allows might not be what Mr. Shoemaker allows. So I think having those expectations of them, it's going to be really important that they're somewhere that's accessible, and maybe you have them contribute to them.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
Right? So in my own classroom, many years ago, first day of school, what do? You go over your expectations. Well, the second day of school, I would ask them what their expectations of me were. And while that seems a little daunting, I loved their feedback. And so I used to take all of that feedback, and many years ago when Wordle was the rage, I would put them all of their responses into a word cloud so it would be generated and I could see what was most important to the kids. And right on my classroom wall, I posted my expectations of the students and their expectations of me. So that contract that we kind of engaged in allowed me to reference that when things got a little off the wall, right? And say, am I holding up my end of the bargain? Let's make sure that we're holding up ours. And I think that that's super important.
This is a good question. How do you stop them from posting social conversation? First of all, you have to have your expectations, and you have to tell your students that you don't expect them to talk about a football game, a soccer game, whatever, in your math Google Classroom, right? That's the first thing. And there are ways in Google Classroom where you can actually mute the student and where they still have to complete all the work, but they can't join the conversation. You could also set your Google Classroom up so students can't post anything to start, and then gradually release the class and say, okay, now you're okay. Now we're going to open up where students can comment on posts. And if a student can't handle that, I always say we vote them off the island for a little bit, you mute them, and that social isolation within itself and not being able to contribute to the classroom is sometimes the punishment enough that they want to be able to communicate with their peers so they won't misbehave. And I think this leads right into our next conversation, though, on being the SEL piece.
It definitely does. So we know that the Department of Teaching and Learning, right? So my department in K-12 curriculum, we provide the what, right? What are you going to teach? And that comes from the state and the standards that they lay out for us. And the Department of Educational Technology currently is providing you with the how. So these are all the platforms and tools we're going to do, right? We're going to use to actually deliver the what. But if we don't really consider where the kids are socially and emotionally right now, we could have the greatest house, we could have the greatest platforms, and we could have the most amazing content, and sadly, it'll be lost on them. So it's really important that as we go through this journey, that we're cognizant of the students socially and emotionally. So students right now, they feel isolated. And the greatest thing about being an educator, I think for me, is that human connection. We have to maintain that indispensable human connection of teaching and learning right now, more so than ever. And we know how impactful a strong student-teacher relationship is. It's almost more impactful than anything, right, in a school setting. We know how much that factors into engagement and student success. And so right now, students are feeling isolated. They are. I've heard from so many teachers, and all their kids keep doing is reaching out to them. They wish they were in school. I know that that sounds crazy to think, right? You're like, I don't feel like that. Like 3 weeks ago, I think that they really wanted to be on spring break, which maybe they did, right? But they're wanting to be back. So as John mentioned before, it's good to have that check-in. How are they feeling? We need to create that safe space. Many people have mentioned that, right? How important it is to create a space where kids can chat. So what does that look like? What does that safety and safe space look like? Staying connected via video. Okay, I know we all can't stand, well, at least I'm speaking for myself. I can't stand myself on video. Like right now, I'm super judging myself, right? But I grew up in a different age than the kids today. They love seeing themselves on a screen. They love making a TikTok video. They love FaceTiming, where I'm kind of like, can you just regular call me? Because I'm not FaceTime ready. So I think it's really important that we stay connected. So you might not want to see yourself, but they really want to see you. And they don't want to see me, right? They don't know me. They know you. They have the relationship with you. Your face really brings them comfort. Hearing your voice, that comes back, right? That's super important. I'm going to share a brief story. So I have a former student of mine who is now an educator or becoming an educator. And she happened to watch this live stream that we did last week. She hasn't heard my voice in, oh gosh, I don't know, at least 12 years. And she said it was like being taught by me all over again. And it was a surreal experience for her. So they want to hear your voice. So the Instructional Continuity Support Plan site has a ton of resources. Kristen Rulison and her team have done a tremendous job in sharing pieces so that we can really maintain those relationships and connections. Are there any opportunities that you can think of where you're connecting, you want to share? Lucretia, that's a really good point. Is it realistic to post an assignment the same day and expect them to turn it in by the end of the day? Well, again, we have to be realistic with our expectations. We know that we're going to have issues there will be Wi-Fi connection issues. I've had them in the last week, right? Where I'm trying to log into a meeting, my computer freezes, I need to restart it. So I think that that's important. We know that there's going to be parents working from home. We know that there's going to be multiple siblings, and they may not have gotten a device for every sibling in a household. I don't know if you want to add anything to this, John.
No, I think that it's a very important thing to think of. Now, obviously, I'm thinking, yes, the attendance form needs to be filled out daily, right? You need to take attendance, and then that needs to be put into our SIS system. But other assignments, unless it's more like a discussion question, you really have to consider, again, 5 or 6 other classes and maybe 2 or 3 other siblings that all are sharing that one device. So that's something important to think about. This was a great tweet, and I apologize it's blurry. I took a screenshot for it. But I think this is a great tweet I saw yesterday, and I know it kind of goes against some of what our normal thought process is, but the SEL component is so important right now in that it's time to start reaching out with small doses of meaningful work, access, and ability for students, and now is the time for compassion. And as Kaylin said, like, I hate being on video. This is like the worst possible thing for me right now. But your students need to see your faces. They need that connection to you because they've connected to you since August, and now they need to continue that connection. A small avatar is not going to be the connection they need from you. Some other questions, you have to keep in mind 504 plans may need extra time. So things like Google Classroom, you can make it. So I create an assignment that goes to all my regular ed or general ed students. I duplicate that assignment, and then I can extend the time or the due date, and then only share it with my students who get extra time. Or I can make a second form and only give them 3 of the multiple choice instead of 4. So there are ways to differentiate your instruction in Google Classroom, and you can do it in a way that the student really doesn't even know that they're getting something different than the general ed students, which again is still one of the most important things as being an ESE teacher. Some things like putting all your assignments due on Friday. That's at midnight. You post them on Monday, they're due by Friday. You have a week to complete the work, and that's up there.
Although I will say, John, as I'm thinking about this, and I think that if we're cognizant about the types of assignments that we're giving kids,
agreed,
right? We want to create assignments that are engaging. We want to create assignments that kids want to do, right? And I know that that's hard, and you're thinking, well, Kaylin, I have to teach math, or I'm teaching this, or whatever content you're teaching, and I can't make that exciting. Like, how do you want me to make rocks exciting? And that's no offense to any earth science teacher. I do physics. But how do I make this exciting? And I don't necessarily think it's the content that you're going to do that with per se. It's the method through which you engage them and you ask them to give you back that whatever input that you want from them, right? So I think allowing them to communicate with each other, this is actually kind of exciting because this is a totally new way of learning. And we may have been using Google Classroom and tools in the past, but we were using it in a very asynchronous way, like just pushing out the information. The kids were giving it back in a very just regular, I gave you an assignment, do the assignment, rather than a space for which students can actually collaborate outside of the building that's brick and mortar, right?
Yep, and we have a great example in our Google Classroom that Dana shares on how you can create your whole lesson with the standard and everything in one chunk. It's really great that we'll be sharing again later today. One question I do want to address before we move on is talking about attendance. You do need to speak, Gladys, to your, Gladys is it? You do need to speak to your admins, and if your admins aren't sure, they can reach out to the regional and instructional soups. Our department doesn't really work with attendance anymore. That's all FTE. That's why we were recommending a form each day. So if they're not logging onto Google Classroom, at least they fill out the form each day. But how attendance is done was addressed in an email to principals with some ideas, but that wasn't an exhaustive list. So that's why we're sharing the attendance form. Kaylin, keep going.
John, if you wouldn't mind throwing back up that tweet, because that actually leads perfect into the next piece.
Give me 1 second. Sure. So there you go.
So you notice it says now is not the time for rigor. Now is not the time for lengthy assignments, not the time for new technology, a lot of new technology. It is the time for small doses of meaningful work, access and availability to students, and compassion. Well, what's interesting is that it says now is not the time for rigor. Well, one of my favorite definitions of rigor comes from Barbara Blackburn. And her definition of rigor, she says that the first piece is that you have to create an environment that is conducive to learning. So you can switch over to me, John. I don't know how.
Yep, go ahead.
But the environment piece is huge. So you can't have rigor in a classroom without an environment that is conducive to learning, right? So she has multiple pieces to her definition, and I love it because she talks about creating the environment. She talks about creating opportunities for kids to perform at high levels, giving them multiple opportunities to do that. And then the teacher efficacy, or the efficacy piece, the student efficacy piece, where what our expectations of the student are. So we have this amazing opportunity to kind of shift our environment. And the benefit actually of this happening at this point in the year is you already have established relationships. And you just have to transition them into this new environment. So these relationships can be easily continued. And it kind of lends itself back to what someone was mentioning before about, well, how do we keep them from having sidebar conversations? Well, we're going to want to continue some of that, right? We're going to want to continue those informal interactions that we have. You know, the interaction when the kid's walking into your classroom on a Monday, hey, how was your weekend? Do you watch the game? Those things are very important. So whether that's sharing a separate piece on your Google Classroom where you're sharing appropriate memes, okay? Let's slow our roll on the Tiger King memes, but you know, or images or videos. And they don't have to be specific to your content, but rather as a means to maintain a sense of community. And I think that that's super important. So we want to consider how we're going to engage students. That is not going to happen solely through just pushing out an assignment one way and expecting a response. Now, we want to start slow. This is super important. The fewer platforms that you start with, the better. Master one. Think about if you wanted to change your whole lifestyle and you're going to get a trainer and you're going to go on a diet and you're going to do all these things. Start with 8 glasses of water a day. And once you master that, then increase your fruit and vegetable servings, right? So if we are going to use Classroom, which we all are, think about it. Think about how you're going to use Classroom and Meet. How are you going to use it for whole group discussion? Could you also consider using it for connecting with smaller groups of students who might need additional help to chat, check in? Maybe those are your students who have IEPs or 504s. Provide additional support. It's important to consider your stopping points. So as we're presenting this live stream right now, we're constantly looking at the chat window. And that's really important because we don't want to get to all the way to the end of a presentation, right? And not having considered what our audience is saying. So it's now what's fortunate for John and me is that we have people supporting us. So I just want to throw this idea out to you. I have several teachers that I support that have decided to do a live class every day. And when they present their live class, they're going to present it as a group. For example, a group of 8th grade science teachers. So they will present as a group in a shared window, a shared Google Meet every day, a live class, which they're going to record. The reason that they're all going to do it together, one, for the camaraderie, right? I guess it's a little less daunting if you're doing it with other people, but also the fact that while one person is speaking and presenting, the other teachers can be handling the channel of comments or the chatting that's going on and handling a lot of those questions. Now, if you're not going to do something like that, or let's say you're the only person that teaches your subject in your school, you're going to want to make sure that you're giving intentional opportunities. And if that means putting in a slide for yourself or a reminder to yourself to stop, ask for clarity, throw a question in there for discussion point, pause to look at the chat. That's very, very important, because this remote learning, while amazing, and there's a ton of opportunity, I think it could also serve as an obstacle for striving students. So it's really, really important that you're cognizant of them disengaging. So setting up this environment is also going to require a bit of flexibility on your part. So, John and I were talking, and I'm thinking, have we really thought about how a physical classroom made of 4 walls is different from a remote learning experience?
Yeah, we haven't had many answers to that question in the chat, but obviously there are the differences are vast and endless, I would think, as to how it's very different from one another. And we have to keep these things in mind as we're moving along. In addition to, we're dealing with families who you have no idea what's going on with your students' families. Some students may have a family member who's gotten sick or may have passed away. So we have to be cognizant of this environment of, there has to be some way to let kids have those sidebar conversations with one another so that they can have that conversation. And it's just a way of thinking out how you can plan that time. And if you don't want to deliver live classes, you can just record a video of yourself. They really need to see you in the end. So with that, we're going to continue to move on if you want.
John, I just wanted to call out John Long's point, and absolutely amazing, a great opportunity. You might have colleagues that teach at other schools.
Yes.
Together with them to collaborate on a lesson. This is really a perfect time. That's like, that virtual field trip type of thing, right? So being able to collaborate or co-teach with a teacher that you have a amazing relationship with at another school, this is an awesome opportunity for that. Perfect.
All right.
And, then our T in reset, transform. So this is a very, very exciting time. It really is. You're like on the brink of something amazing. But we're seriously outside of our comfort zone, right? So, but isn't that when you grow? You got to be outside your comfort zone to grow. And I think that this is an amazing opportunity to grow professionally. So it's going to be really important right now that you're good to yourself. As I said before, we're gonna have bumps in the road. Expect them, and it's okay. You got to forgive yourself though, and be able to fail forward. John and I talk about this a lot, that in order to be innovative, right? In order to feel like you can try something new, you have to feel like it's okay to fail. So this is the time, because there are no tests, right? So if this is the time you've been waiting for, right? Take it. It's a golden opportunity to be innovative, to apply creative solutions, to try different challenges, whether they're real world, whether they're problem-based learning opportunities. And what's really cool is that this is an opportunity to connect with students in a new context. We've never done this before. You may have had assignments that you pushed out through Classroom, but just think of the opportunity of this, what we're doing right now with kids. This is a new context. This is filled with opportunity. And I'm pretty excited, because as much as this is going to be really tough, I promise you, you're all going to come out of this better educators. You will be a better educator as a result of this new challenge at the end of the day. I can't wait to see what comes out of this. I don't know about you, John.
Yeah, I agree, Kaylin. There are some questions in the chat, and we'll get to them as well. They're talking about the difference between this and Google Meet. We did choose this platform mostly because we knew that we were going to hit over 250 people last week for sure. Google Meet only allows for 250 users at a time. Whereas this is YouTube Live, so we're like streaming live on YouTube like a regular YouTuber would be doing. This can do up to 100,000 users. Right, exactly. So we're using a product called StreamYard. There is a free version, but really you would only want to do something like this if you're doing more than 250 users at a time, because there is that need for students to be able to see and chat with one another in Google Meet. And as long as you are the one making the meeting, you'll be able to mute the students who won't mute themselves. You'll have control in those Google Meet rooms. So yes, please be sure that this is different from Google Meet because you guys can only chat. You cannot actually talk to us audio, and you can't show us your cameras. This actually records automatically to our YouTube channel so that other people can see it. So within Google Meet, though, there is an actual button where you can record. I did see someone say that they can't wait to use Flipgrid, which is great. We're going to do Flipgrid next week. What we really wanted to do was start off with your basics that we knew you needed to get started, which is what we're doing now. And then starting Wednesday, we're going to start introducing new products. Like we're going to start doing Newsela and HyperDocs, then Flipgrid next week and Adobe Spark, because what we're trying to do is get you to transform that teaching. We really want you to move beyond those worksheets and simple multiple choice quizzes. Now's the time where you should Google your subject area and project-based learning ideas and see what opportunities other teachers have already done for you, and do some real world teaching. Kaylin's been talking with some of her teachers about just teaching about viruses and pandemics because, hello, it's relevant.
We had a huge opportunity with that, with deciphering good sources, right? We always talk to kids about that. We have an opportunity with reading graphs, making projections. We have an opportunity with looking at pandemics in history and how this is different or how it's affected other aspects of history. The difference between pathogens, parasites, fungi, bacteria, viruses. There are huge opportunities right now. The debate around vaccinations and why schools require kids to have shots. I mean, there is a ton of information out there and the kids are actually really interested. So let's think about that.
I also see we have people talk about Screencastify. That's where you can actually record your screen and do a voiceover, which is a great idea. And I did see something where they're talking about only 5 minutes or less. I know they extended it, but also we need to think about who's going to be watching our videos. So you know that your student is going to be watching your video. If you make a longer than 5 minute video,
a brain pop is less than 5 minutes.
Yeah. And I cringe sometimes when I look at a YouTube video and it's 20 minutes long and I'm like, oh, do I really want to invest 20 minutes to watch this YouTube video? And that's normally like highly entertaining, like YouTubers that are famous. And, you know, sometimes I don't even want to watch that long. So make sure you chunk it. That's for sure. That's a big piece of it.
Absolutely. So, and I think that, you know, as John mentioned, with your videos or your instruction, and maybe we didn't say this before, we have the time frame set out on the instructional continuity support plan website, right? What the suggested time frame is, whether you're elementary or secondary for every subject. But when we suggest 45 minutes, and I'll use science because that's my wheelhouse. When we say 45 minutes for science, that's not a 45-minute video or lecture, right? That's your class period. And we know in a class period what we do. We might have a bell ringer, right? We might go over that. I'm just going to walk you through that briefly. Then we go ahead and we do some instruction, some direct instruction. Then we allow kids to process together. We might ask some elaborative questions, and then we ask them to record or represent their knowledge, and there's an exit ticket, right? But the time that you're actually presenting to the kids or giving them information, the input piece that you're giving to them, that's no more than 15 minutes. It's closer to 10. So think about when we say 45 minutes, that includes the processing time on the kids' part and them doing work as well. So it's not 45 minutes of you on a Google Meet lecturing your kids. If that's you wanting to set aside that block of time, doing whatever you're going to do, and then telling your kids, I'll be online and stay in the meet if you have questions, that's totally fine. So don't think it's 45 minutes of video or lecture. And I think that may, help a little bit with that.
Yeah, and talking about what do we mean by chunking the video, we basically mean like John Long answered. Instead of doing a 120-minute long video, you do 4 or 5-minute videos with, okay, here's video 1, please watch this, and here's an activity. Video 2 and an activity. So you get through your 20 minutes, but then that's really your 45-minute class because you've got these activities interspersed throughout your lesson. And that way your kids just aren't sitting there and not watching it. That's the most important thing.
Like Caroline, I'll give you an example. Thinking of, let's say, how the Earth, Sun, and Moon have a relationship with each other. Cause a lot of things, right? From our lunar cycle to the days that we have, our seasons, our year, tides, eclipses. There's so many cool things. So am I going to teach that all in one full swoop? No. I might one day just talk about rotation and revolution. And these two movements lead to days and years. And then the next day I'm going to talk about tilt, which affects our seasons. And then I'm going to next day talk about, a solstice and an equinox and go further into that piece of seasons. And then the next day I'm going to talk about the moon and how that relationship or that positioning with the sun and the earth creates the different shapes or the different phases, should I say, of the moon that we see. And then I'm going to talk, and so on and so forth, but not all up at front and then asking the kids to do all of this work after. I don't know if that helps or not, but I hope so.
For sure. So we've already run a little bit over. We apologize. All of our upcoming trainings will be listed at edtechtraining.palmbeachschools.org. And also, Kaylin and I have some other ideas that we're going to be adding to that lineup. So stay tuned to that whole website.
One in particular, and I hope you guys would be interested in this, is around discussions, both asynchronous, synchronous discussions, how to platforms to use for that, types of questions, a lot of things around discussions. I think that's going to be really important as we venture into this. And I think you guys are going to do an amazing job. And I wish you the very best first day tomorrow.
Yes, please feel free to reach out to anyone that was in the chat or us if you need more assistance. We will see you later on today for the rest of our webinars. Thank you so much and have a great day.